Hello and welcome to the second of the Growing Care Farming monthly themed webinars. This one covers cyber and data security, and we have two knowledgeable guest speakers supporting us today. We hope you enjoy the webinar and find it useful. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Social Farms and Gardens website in due course. Your attendees should know that they are not on a link and will automatically be muted. Any questions can be asked, however, through the questions function in the menu. You can type your question and one of the team will pick it up and answer it on your behalf. Ask it on your behalf, or if you wish, we can unmute you once the recording has finished to ask the question at the end if you would rather ask it in person. Please follow the links in the presentation to any signposted resources. We should do some introductions first of all. So my name's Sarah Marrison, I'm the Regional Support Officer for the Northern Region. We also have on the webinar Deborah Evans, who's the Regional Care Farming Manager. Deborah isn't actually taking part in these sort of presentations today, but she is around and she is available to answer questions at the Q&A session at the end. The two people we've got working with us to present are Mike Stein. Mike's an IT manager who's been working in the charity sector for over 20 years now and has lots of experience of working in organisations where budgets are fairly small. In addition to this, we have Rachel Fell-Chambers, who is a care farmer over in Humberside and is also one of our Code of Practice assessors. And she will talk a little bit more about data security and how that relates to care farmers. So just quickly, I just wanted to say that this webinar is part of the Growing Care Farming project, which most of you will probably know about. And it's a project which will expand and transform care farming services across England through 4 key elements. If you want to find out more about the project, then do go to our website and there's plenty of information up there that you can get more details from. I'm going to hand over to Mike, who's going to talk a bit about the difference between cybersecurity and information security. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name's Mike, thanks for that Sarah. Today we'll be having a whistle-stop look at cybersecurity and information security and looking at how we can keep our data safe. We actually hold, when we think about it, we actually hold quite a lot of various types of data. This can be financial data, data about participants, can be resources that we have, and can be other business critical files and folders that we need to operate. The thought of that data being leaked or lost is absolutely the thing of nightmares. The whole subject can be really daunting, but today what we hope to do is to increase awareness and to help you keep your data safe. There are 2 definitions on the screen. So cybersecurity, which focuses on protecting computer systems from unauthorized access or being damaged or made inaccessible, and information security, which is a much broader approach that aims to protect all information assets, whether in hard copy or digital form. We live in a connected world, and many of the threats that our data is subject to originate on the internet. However, many of these threats are unstructured. What that means is these threats are opportunistic and they will exploit vulnerabilities in our systems. There's quite a few things that we can do without a great deal of expertise and without entailing much expenditure that will help us to secure our data and to make sure we're not subject to any breaches or anything like that. In other words, what we want to do today is to ensure that we are not the low-hanging fruit that the cyber criminals can easily harvest. So we do have a lot of data that relates to others, but what about our data? So we have a lot of data that other sites will store. So how do we know that the data that we have with them, how do we know that that is safe? Well, if you look at the screen here, there's a couple of images. So the image on the left is from the BBC News website just a couple of weeks ago, and that relates to coronavirus contact tracing, where Serco, who were the contractors, they accidentally shared the addresses of 300 contact tracers. So this was rather embarrassing. Serco are a big organisation, multi-billion-pound. They will have a massive budget for cyber security. What we need to make sure is when we talk about cyber security, we don't forget about human behaviour. So in this particular incident, this would have been someone who sent an email and probably entered a lot of email addresses in the CC field rather than the BCC field. In that respect, these addresses were made public, not what you would consider to be a massive breach of privacy, but it's still people's information, and it's still important and probably still something which needs to be reported to the ICO, the information, sorry, I can't remember what that stands for, Information Commissioner's Office. What we see on the right-hand side is some of the biggest data breaches and hacks in the last couple of years. What we will see is lots of names that we recognise. So Facebook there, Capital One, Bank, Microsoft, Marriott Hotels, lots of big names. There's a fair chance that some of us, maybe all of us, have some of our information which has been leaked in some of these security incidents. So that's quite important. If we are thinking about securing our data, if some of our information has been breached by others, we need to be aware of that. We need to make sure that we take back control of our data. How do we do that? Well, there is a website that we can look at, and I would definitely recommend that you do this. And I would recommend that you do this not just for work email addresses, but for personal email addresses. Any email addresses that we use, I would recommend you to do this. So this is a site called www.haveibeenowned.com. So yes, it is spelt with a P, but it definitely is pronounced owned. I think that's gamer speak. Probably some American kids came up with that one. This website, if you do log into it, it lets you put in your email address. So I've actually put in the image on the right, I actually put in my personal email address and did a quick search, and it says that, oh no, I've been owned. I've been owned on 9 breached sites. So when I actually looked at the data, so if I was to scroll down further, I'll be able to find out where my data has been breached from. And I will see that there's some big names there. So my account there was a breach by Dropbox a good few years ago, and another one by Adobe, and 1 or 2 other smaller websites, one for MySpace, which goes way back. But this is important because while we shouldn't do it, we often use the same passwords for various accounts. So this is an email account, but we tend to register with various websites using that email account, and quite often we'll use the same password, which is a bad thing, but it is human nature. But at least if we have this piece of information, if we know that our data has been compromised, at the very least, we can change our password, definitely for our email account, and definitely for those services which are being hacked. So that is really important, because otherwise, if we take some of the steps that we look at further down the line in this presentation, if our data is being leaked on the internet anywhere, then that's an extra vulnerability that cyber criminals can exploit. Our data is subject to a number of threats. Like I said, what we'll mainly be concentrating today is the lower end type of threats, the more common threats, the threats that relate to, as I said, vulnerabilities. So these are things which we can control. If we were a blue chip organization, then we may be subject to targeted attacks. Or if we were a much bigger corporation, we might be subject to government sponsored attacks. But that's well beyond the scope of today's talk. So what we're talking about is the opportunistic attacks. So as I mentioned, these attack vulnerabilities in our setup. So if we do not have the latest software on our computers, whether or not that's operating systems, whether or not that's software, building software is incredibly difficult, and it's almost inevitable that there will be bugs in that software, there will be vulnerabilities that cyber attackers can use to gain access to our systems. When they gain access to our systems, they then potentially have access to our data. If they've got access to our data, that data can be stolen, that data can be encrypted, that data can be lost to us, and that would be an absolute disaster for many of us. The vulnerability exploits, that's something that we can tackle just by using the latest software or the latest versions of the software that we use, and that will save us from many, many attacks. Another attack that we've probably been all victims of are phishing attacks. So phishing attacks, that's the practice of sending fraudulent communications, often emails, but also text, also phone calls. They appear to come from a reputable source. The goal is to get sensitive data like credit card details, log-on information, or by us clicking on perhaps a link or whatever, the goal will be to, by default, install malware on our computers, and that malware then can be used to replicate and spread the malware on other people's computers within our offices, but also to our partners and other organisations. So I had to look at my email, and I didn't have to look back too far before I found a phishing email. So this one appears to come from Netflix, but this was sent to my work email address. Well, yes, I do have Netflix, but I definitely don't have Netflix registered with my work email address. I just wouldn't do that. What's quite often with phishing emails, many of them originate from overseas, and often the spelling, grammar, and punctuation are poor. I have highlighted on the image on the right, I've highlighted some aspects of that email which I'm just not happy about. So even without looking at the content, I can just say that, well, Netflix is spelled wrong. The email address is one which I certainly wouldn't expect Netflix to use. In the email, I'm referred to as customer. I would expect, if this was genuine, I would expect to be referred to by name, but that's definitely not a guarantee. And we'll see that there are some grammar errors in the text towards the bottom of that email. What's also quite common with phishing attacks is there will be a veiled threat. So that threat in here, this veiled threat, it is quite veiled because it's just saying that, oh, you might want to change your password. But that is drawing us in, and if we were to click on the change your password link, that would almost certainly take us to a fraudulent website, which would look very much like Netflix, but it would ask us for our existing login details. And then, of course, once we divulge those, that data is available to the cyber criminals. That data will end up on various lists on the internet. We will get more and more spam, and we'll find ourselves just absolutely wading around in dozens and dozens of emails like this every day. So phishing is incredibly common. You've probably all had similar experiences to this. A lot of them are even more, well, a lot more convincing than this. Sometimes they will appear to come from people within your organization. It's always, when you do get an email, and if it asks for anything out of the ordinary, anything you weren't expecting from a person that you weren't expecting an email from, if that person is acting out of character, then yeah, be ultra cautious. Try perhaps calling the person, just double checking to make sure it is genuine. Lots of phishing attacks are very convincing. So we've had some in one of the organisations that I look at, and that does mention, say, a finance assistant by name. It mentions the manager by name and asking for payment to be made to a particular account. All fraudulent, but very convincing. So we will be looking at some ways in which we can secure our system using technology, but just good education and awareness about these threats, that's as invaluable as any of the technology that we're going to be looking at in a few moments. Another threat is ransomware. So ransomware is malware which may well infect our computer through a phishing email. It might infect our computer through accessing an unscrupulous website, by email attachments, anything like that. Ransomware is particularly nasty. So you may remember a couple of years ago when there was a ransomware virus called WannaCry, and that attacked, it didn't just attack the NHS, but it did bring the NHS down for a few days, lots of operations cancelled and things like that. With ransomware, what tends to happen is your data, you'll suddenly find that your data is encrypted. You tend to get a message just saying that you can get your data unencrypted if you make payment of however many hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoins. So that is a very murky world and not something that you would want to get involved with at all. And in any respect, paying of the ransom is no guarantee that the files will be unlocked or decrypted. But one of the organisations, not an organisation I work for, but one of the organisations I've worked with in the past, they were hit by a ransomware attack. It was actually before this one, the one you can see on screen, so it was a year or two before this. That organisation, it did take data backups, but it only had 5 days worth of backup. And it took a couple of days for me to become aware that this organisation had been attacked. You know, some people couldn't access some files, just thought nothing of it, things will be better tomorrow. As it happens, we managed to recover all of the encrypted data and not have to pay the ransom. With it was just hours to spare. It was almost like a film, you know, with the clock ticking. It was quite scary, and I certainly wouldn't want to do that again. In that instance, I think a member of staff had clicked on a dodgy email, a dodgy link, or tried to download some software that was a free trial or something like that. It was easily done, but as I said before, just making sure that users and ourselves are very cautious when using email, because it is a particularly, it's an easy way for us to get infected by malware, and not very nice at all. Okay, so how can we make our systems better? Well, in actual fact, it's not as hard as you might imagine. The very first thing, and in actual fact, all the things that we're going to do now will help us gain some Cyber Essentials accreditation. So Cyber Essentials is a scheme which is run centrally by the government, and that provides an accreditation to say that this organisation matches or meets the minimum requirements of cyber security and information security. So everything that we do here ties into that, but everything that we are doing here is absolutely essential, I would say. We should be doing most of these things anyway. And if we do these things and we log them, then we are part of the way to getting Cyber Essentials accreditation. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is, it is quite simple. We need to make sure that we know where all of our kit is, what kit we have. This is IT kit, anything which is which processes our data. So this primarily includes desktop computers, laptops, tablets, and smartphones. But we also need to look at our internet routers. We need to look at our networking kit if we have any, if depending on the scale of our operations, and also even things like printers. Lots of printers are Wi-Fi printers, and some of them are unsecured. If it is quite easy to print things off onto an unsecured printer and potentially gain access to other elements of the network. But if we make a list of all of our kit, then at least we know the scope of the operation. We know the size of our task. Once we've done that, we can then start looking at some of our kit. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we do back up our data. So backups are incredibly important. As I mentioned before, the company that I've done work with who were attacked by ransomware, they did have backups, but only a very small window of backup. And that was quite frightening. We do need to back up our data regularly. It's easy to get complacent and not back things up. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow never comes, or sometimes it's just too late. So backing up your data is absolutely essential. One of the things you might want to look at is how long you need to keep those backups for. How long will it be before you realize that there's an issue with some of the files that you're working with? And you may want to include these with regards to your archiving operations for all the data. I've got a little image here on my screen. So I'm working on a Windows 10 laptop. I'm not sure what sort of computers your guys are using, but I'm working at home at the moment because our offices are still closed. So my work laptop, I created backups on my laptop just by inserting an external hard disk. And in Windows, if you have Windows 10 or any version of Windows, Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, Windows 10, there is backup software on there. So if you don't have any servers, if you just have individual computers, it's very important that you do set up backups on your computers. And in the green box at the bottom, that shows you how to do that on Windows 10. So Windows 10, all settings, update and security, backup. And to set up a backup, it takes minutes. It doesn't take long at all. It might take a period of time for the backup to run. As you can see, my backup, it automatically runs, it backs up my files every hour. So if I have a ransomware attack, if I have any sort of attack on my computer, the most amount of data that I will lose will be 1 hour. That's very optimistic. In a business sense, we don't have the facilities to back up that much data that regularly. But for the organizations I work with, we would expect not to lose more than 3 hours work. 3 hours work can be a lot of work, but it's certainly much better than having to go back day after day after day. Or if we don't have backups, then we will have lost a lot of information and possibly put the business at risk. The next thing we need to do is on our computers, we just need to make sure that they are free of viruses and malware. Hopefully we're all using antivirus software at the moment. If we aren't, then there's a raft of solutions that we can use. There are paid-for solutions, which genuinely are pretty good. So there's Kaspersky, there's McAfee, there'll be Sophos, there'll be Norton, so lots of names that we'll have heard of. They tend to provide really good coverage in actual fact. So they will look after viruses, they'll look after malware, they'll perhaps look after making sure that you're safe browsing online and things like that. They'll make sure that things like credit card details can't be stolen. If you don't have any antivirus software at the moment, then there are some free software versions available. Avast and AVG are versions of antivirus software that I've used quite a bit in the past. Also, Windows 10 has Windows Defender, which is actually pretty good. And that's what I'm using on my home computers when I'm not on this business computer. Another piece of software which is really good is Malware Hunter. So if we have, for example, a free version of antivirus software, it probably doesn't look at malware. Malware is sometimes software that we've actually almost invited onto our computer by opening up a link, by clicking on an email. If we use a anti-malware software along with antivirus software, we're in a much better position. Once we've done this, we know that our computers rather, are safe, and the data on those computers is going to be backed up because we've set backups in. Right, just moving away from our computer at the moment, the other thing which is important to do is to look at our routers. So I'm working at home at the moment. I've just got a little BT Home Hub, I think it is, and it's actually pretty secure. It does have secure passwords on, but certainly some of the routers that we have at work, they're a bit older. They only have very simple passwords. It'd be something like admin and password, and they are the real no-no. What we need to do is, if we can, we need to log on to the router or firewall. There will be instructions, possibly on the underside of the router, to tell us how to do that. What we need to do is to give a complex password. So this will be a password of at least 8 characters, which is difficult to guess, and be a mix of uppercase, lowercase, special characters, and numbers. Just make sure that the router that we have could potentially be a firewall as well, could be a combined device that is the gateway to our network or our computers anyway. So we need to make sure that that's secure as well. And just by putting on a decent password, difficult guess password, that really does help. With our firewalls, in this instance, my router is also my firewall. I just hopped onto my firewall and just made sure, with my router rather, just made sure that the firewall was set to block all unsolicited incoming traffic. If you do this, which is easy to do on most routers anyway, this will your router will kick out any unsolicited messages at all. So it is really worth doing. Otherwise, you might find your computer is attacked a bit more often, which is certainly not something that we want. If we take a belt and braces approach, Windows, if you're using Windows, does have a built-in software firewall as well. So it's always good to have hardware firewall and the software firewall, especially if they're free. So the router firewall that we had, that was free. That was part of our subscription to our internet provider. And if we've got Windows, the Windows firewall is free. So what we need to make sure is that we just turn that on. It just gives us that extra bit of security. It is something that we can adapt just depending on what services we operate. But by and large, if we turn on the Windows firewall, that gives us a little bit extra protection, which is a little bit of protection is a bonus. Now, if we go back to our computers, what we really do need to make sure is that, if possible, if we've got laptops, desktop computers that are not really used for work and domestic use, sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes, we're running on very limited budgets, so we do have to make compromises like that. So if that is the case, then what we need to make sure is that each user has their own password. It could be that you have a personal account for your personal browsing or whatever, but when you're doing work, you can log on with a business account. That's all quite easy to do if you're using Windows 10, any version of Windows. You can either do that in all settings accounts, or you can do that in control panel and accounts. And then you can just set up users for members of your family, members of your team, and it just makes sure that your various bits of data are separate from each other's. So your children, for example, wouldn't be accessing your spreadsheets, or not very easily anyway. Another thing that is important to do, we did talk about vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities, they're quite common in lots of pieces of software. When we buy a computer, it tends to come with a lot more software than we actually need. So it is important, if we can, to remove unwanted software from our computers. So if we're using Windows 10, we can do that in all settings, apps and features, which gets rid of unwanted apps. Or we can do, if we're using more traditional programs like PowerPoint, Word, etc., we can do that in all settings, apps and features, programs and features. We can then uninstall programs that we don't need, programs that we probably didn't even know were on the system at all. If you use Macs, all of this is it's fairly similar. If you go to the App Store, you can manage your apps. If you're on a Mac, you can access various user accounts as well, except also. Okay, still talking about vulnerabilities. What we need to make sure, if we can, is that we're using a version of Windows that is supported, or if we're using a Mac, a version of Mac OS which is supported currently. If you use an iPad, then the version of iOS is supported. So what tends to happen is versions of various bits of software will be supported for a period of time. So on the screen there, I've listed a number of versions of Windows. Hopefully none of us are still using Windows XP, which actually expired 6 years ago, really. Windows Vista, don't know many people who run that, but lots of people still use Windows 7. Windows 7 expired, it came out of support in January this year. By coming out of support, Microsoft aren't providing any security updates to that bit of software, to Windows 7. And that becomes a bit of a threat because any vulnerabilities in Windows 7 become well known amongst cyber criminals and therefore easier to exploit. So what you really need to do is to be using probably Windows 8.1 or Windows 10. If we can, we always try and use the latest version. With Windows, one thing which you might not know is if you're using Windows 7, 8, 8.1, you can almost certainly upgrade for free. That would certainly be the case if your computer came preloaded with Windows. It would have a digital license. If we were to go to the internet, do a search for download Windows 10, go to the Microsoft website, then we would be able to download Windows 10 and install it over the top of our current systems. But it does need a bit of work, so make sure that you have backed up all of your files and folders first. But it is an easy way to get onto the latest version of Windows without any extra cost. You need to make sure that all other software is up to date. A lot of us will be using Office. So again, the same with Windows, lots of versions of Office that are still knocking around are actually out of support or will be out of support very soon. And again, these versions will have vulnerabilities which are potentially exploitable by cyber criminals. So if possible, we need to be using a version of Windows which is colored green on the screen. Another thing we can do is when we look at Windows updates, rather, so if I just go back, okay, we can make sure that any version of Windows software is up to date by going to Windows Update or settings, Windows Security, Windows Update. There's also an extra option there to receive updates from other Microsoft products. This will make sure that any Windows version that we have is the latest version of the type that we're running, and any version of Office, likewise, is the latest version of the one we're running with all the software patches installed. Usually we would get Windows and Windows updates. It would run automatically. So we probably wouldn't have to think too much about it. We just need to check it every now and again to make sure that it is working the way we want. And what I would suggest is we go into Windows updates, just make sure that all of our updates are up to date. If we do that every fortnight, every month, something like that, that would be good. As long as we get in the habit of doing that, it just closes down the number of vulnerabilities that we have on our machines. And believe it or not, if we've done those steps, if we back up our data, if we make sure we're running anti-malware and antivirus software, if we're running the latest versions of Windows, if possible, and Office, and if we've secured our routers, then we're well on the way to being eligible for Cyber Essentials certification. As I said, this is run by the government. There's a couple of good links there, so do check those out. Lots of information about other cybersecurity topics, and some information about Cyber Essentials itself. Cyber Essentials you do have to pay for, but it is a way that you can demonstrate that you take Cyber Essentials, that you take cybersecurity seriously. I think the cost is currently about £300 to have that verified. But don't worry about that. If that is too much, you can always click on that link and at least go through the scoring procedure. So there will be templates there that you can fill in, and it might be that you decide not to go for the certification, but you know that you have done everything that you need to. And if you absolutely had to go for the certification, then you can do that more or less at the drop of the hat. It takes about 24 hours from submission to get your accreditation. It is pretty quick. The other thing which comes with Cyber Essentials is it comes with some free cybersecurity insurance. I think when we did this, which was last year, we paid the £300 for certification, and we got, I think it was £25,000 worth of insurance cover that would kick in if we continue to meet the obligations of Cyber Essentials. But if we did that and still had an information security incident, then that insurance would cover a lot of data recovery costs, a lot of legal costs, and that sort of stuff. So I think it was definitely something which is a benefit to us. Thankfully, we never had to use it, but it's good to have that extra bit of security. Right, so that's me done with regards to looking at cybersecurity and information security, and Rachel will look at some of the data that you do store in a bit more detail. So I'll just pass over to Rachel. Rachel.
There we go. Hello, everybody. That's a minefield, isn't it, to get our heads around, but some really, really useful tips for storing our data on a care farm. So what I'm going to do in the time I've got is just go over a few issues around GDPR and how it can impact on a care farm and our operations. On a care farm, we deal with a vast range of personal data. So it's really, really important that we have systems in place to safeguard and protect our clients and also our staff, volunteers, and those that we may be accommodating on a work experience. So it covers all of those individuals. I've just got a couple of slides, you'll be pleased to know, and I'm going to use some questions as prompts for me to make sure I cover things that I feel that's relevant for you. So what type of data do we have and what might we handle on a care farm? It's really important that we identify this from the start. So we handle lots of highly sensitive and identifiable data, and this can come in a range of forms, but the things that strike me as the most common forms of information that we will deal with are referral forms. So when you first receive information about somebody that might want to come to your farm, you'll receive information, name, address, information about medication perhaps, emergency contact details, maybe information about criminal record perhaps, information about disabilities, mental health, health and history. So, you know, highly sensitive data here right from the start. And then on your agreement forms, this information is also there. Staff, we will handle highly sensitive data around staff right from the beginning of your recruitment processes. So from when we're recruiting for staff, sending you CVs, information about DBS, numbers, medication, again, health issues, criminal record issues that will hold on staff as well. So it covers all of those. Where might the data come from? So the data that we receive may come from parents and carers, commissioners, and by commissioners I mean all of those individuals that refer to our care farms, care management teams, GPs, occupational therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, many other commissioners that we work with. Schools, the data could come from schools if we're working with young people who are still on the school rolls. what format might the data be in? So it might be a paper, a bit of paper somebody hands you when they arrive in the morning. I've been there when somebody's walked in and said, oh, I've changed the address, I've written our new address on a piece of paper, there you go. And you're left with this piece of paper. You've got 10 other clients to look after, you've got staff asking you what you're doing today, you've got the phone ringing, and then you've got this piece of paper which is identifiable for your clients. And you know, what can we do about making sure that information is safeguarded? Hopefully we can avoid that kind of paper being handed over, but it is something for you to be aware of and being proactive about that. Majority of our information about clients will come from emails, and perhaps emails are sent and then a password to access the information perhaps sent on another email, which is what we hope. Whilst individuals are on a care farm, and whilst obviously you're employing staff, there's going to be ongoing data sharing. So there may be reviews. You know, we review our clients to see how well they're doing and the progress that they've made. There might be information around changes to medication, hospitalisation perhaps. There might be school behaviour reports. So it's that ongoing data sharing that we will be dealing with and trying to safeguard whilst running our care farms. So before GDPR, we would hopefully still be abiding with the Data Protection Act and storing information in a locked filing cabinet. But obviously now we need to be much more proactive about how we're storing this data. Is it fireproofed? Who can access your filing cabinet? Is this clearly written down somewhere? You know, Mike was talking about obviously using IT, and I'm well aware in some care farms, mine included, we have one laptop that the admin officer can use, that we might have to use to type up reviews. Another member of staff might be logging details. You know, our Wi-Fi isn't great out in the middle of sunny East Yorkshire. So, you know, how do you manage it on a, you know, maybe a limited internet stream on one laptop? You know, how are we being really, really proactive here in keeping our information safe with the limitations that we have? So post GDPR, how do we need to store the data? All of the things that Mike has just discussed are obviously really, really important to protecting our data that we're storing electronically. But the things that I wanted to mention to you really is information around privacy notices, policies, GDPR policies, and making sure you appoint a data protection officer for your care farm. Somebody who's responsible for ensuring GDPR is abided by, and also responsible for sharing the information amongst your staff team, because we need our staff and volunteers obviously to be aware of GDPR and sign up to obviously keeping information safe. So one thing that we did was create a GDPR policy. You'll see on the screen now, this is just a copy of our policy. I'm not saying this is the world's best policy. I'm saying it's the one that I put together in conjunction with staff and other organisations who had shared templates and things. So this identifies, you know, what is the information that we collect around and from our service users and from our staff. You'll see point 1, I've listed that. We identify how we use the information and who we share it with. So I've got a list there of who I may be sharing data with. What are we going to do about reasonable security measures? So I list here in the policy what we're going to do. Any paper documents with personal data will be cross-shedded and then burnt. One of Farmer Dennis's favourite activities, having his bonfires. And yeah, we list that, we make it really, really clear. One thing your policies have to be is very, very clear. It has to be in childlike language, which is the terminology used by the Information Commissioner, and inaccessible language as well. So it doesn't need to be fancy and full of jargon. It just needs to be really, really clear for everybody to see. There's a section on rights, the rights for information to say, Rachel, can you let me know what information you hold about me? I have to be able to respond to that. I have to be organised enough to say, yes, this is the information I have on you. And that's called a subject access request. And then obviously contact details for the data protection officer, which is myself. So we have to periodically review the data we hold on individuals. You know, consider, do you need this information? Do I need information about clients who attended the care farm 10 years ago? Do I need to hold all of these copies of schemes of work from a qualification I ran 7 years ago? You might have to. You might have to keep funding and documentation. Depends on what your funders state. It obviously varies depending on the funding body, but consider, do you need to hold the information? Because if you don't, get rid of it, else you're breaching the Data Protection Act. There's many self-assessment tools out there which I used originally to check, you know, what we need to be doing in terms of the organisation of our size and the people that we work with. The other document that we produce is a privacy notice. This is very, very similar to the information that I have on the GDPR policy, but this is more specifically to give to our clients, carers, one-to-one staff, volunteers, work experience. I ask them to read that as part of their induction, day one, and sign to say that they are happy and consenting to Denzone Care Farm, my care farm, contacting them, and that they are fully aware that I may be sharing their personal detail with the organisations listed in 2.2. And then they're signed by either the client or their carer or their representative, staff member, etc. And then I collate that and store that safely, of course. So that's really important to do. I mean, we work with a care home that week by week we have different carers coming. And yes, it's onerous, but I have to make sure that, or the team have to make sure that this is shared with them alongside our safeguarding policy, because of course it's all very relevant. So 2 more things is this is highly important for the code of practice, the care farming code of practice. This is section 2.5 in the code of practice, that we're looking when we're assessing for the code of practice that care farms are adhering and are compliant with GDPR, that service user and referral data is kept secure and in line with the regulations, and that you have a policy such as this or a confidentiality policy in place to protect our service users, staff, etc. One final point I wanted to mention, and it's an issue that I've dealt with on the care farm since GDPR. We've had to change things. We have a range of volunteers, fantastic volunteers and staff members and carers who all have other activities that they do outside the care farm. And sometimes I've been asked if a volunteer is running a support group or maybe an arts group or some other type of group outside the care farm activities, could they have the client's details to invite them to this brilliant support group for them to attend at another time? All well-intentioned, but actually I can't give that those clients' details out because I'm breaching GDPR. Clients have not confirmed and signed to say, or staff, that they will share their details. See point 2, obviously on your screen now. I haven't listed it there, therefore I can't share that information. Bit of a sensitive conversation to be held, but it's really, really important that you are absolutely crystal clear on the data and who you are sharing it with. And if consent isn't given, then we can't share it. Okay, so I think that is the information I wanted to share with you. It seems quite scary, but I think if we've got things in place, and we have to be practicable about it and put in place some of the things Mike has mentioned to try and safeguard our fantastic work that we all do. So I am going to hand back to Sarah, very, very happy to answer questions from anybody. So I'm going to try and see if I can do this without making a complete cock-up. Right, change presenter. to Sarah.
Hi everyone. Right, thanks so much, Rachel. That was wonderful, and Mike. So I just wanted to quickly go over just one or two slides, and then obviously we'll pick up any questions that have come through. So far, no questions have been received, but I'm expecting a few to pop through shortly while I cover this last couple of items. So just a couple of more further sources of information for you. So one of the things I talked about with Rachel when we were preparing for this was whether there was sort of a plain English summary anywhere, particularly to use with service users, around what data protection means and what you might need to use their data for. And this first link at the Resource Centre is a really good, I think it's about a 6-page document which highlights what data protection means, what data organisations might hold about you, and what your rights are basically. And it's quite a simple and illustrated guide which might be useful for some of you depending on the service user groups you're working with. There's also a link there below to the Information Commissioner's Office, which, as both Mike and Rachel have mentioned, is the UK's independent body. There is, if you go on the website, there's quite a lot of useful information on there, but there's also a helpline there. So if ever you have any GDPR related questions, you can ring the helpline and get some information from them and some support there for free. And obviously they're there to not only to regulate, but to support and make sure that organisations can do the best they can and follow those guidelines. Finally, on this slide, I've just highlighted one potential training course which I found, which is actually free. So this is just a simple sort of online training course. I think it takes somewhere between an hour and 2 hours, depending on how quickly you read or watch the videos or whatever. There are lots and lots of other GDPR training courses out there, lots of different providers that may be chargeable. I'm not saying that this is the best one, but this is one that I've found that is available and it is free. So if you wanted to use it as a starting point, just to get familiar with what GDPR means when we talk about specific permission, what that means, and how you can only hold data that you have people's specific permission for. So it might just be a good starting point if you want to kind of make sure you're genned up on that sort of area, really.
Sarah, we can't see your screen for some reason.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry about that. I thought you'd shared my screen. Let me just change. It says I am the presenter. I apologise. I am. Can you see it now? Has anything changed?
We can now. Thank you.
Right. Apologies for that. It was showing me as the presenter, but it wasn't sharing my screen. Right. So, so those are the 3 links that I've just talked you through: the plain English guide, the Information Commissioner's Office web page and helpline, and the link to the free GDPR online training. Obviously, this is going to be recorded, so if you feel like there's anything you've missed or you want to recap on, you'll be able to watch it once it's uploaded onto the website. So now was the time that if anyone had any questions, that we could have a look and just see if there was anything that needed answering, really. One thing that has popped up is just a question around file sharing software, Mike. So with everyone working from home and care farm teams being split and people perhaps wanting to work on the same documents in different locations, it was just a question around whether what the best options were for secure and safe file sharing.
Well, well, Sarah, what I would suggest is if people do have access to Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, to perhaps start storing information on those internet, cloud-based drives or whatever. If documents are shared like that, then the documents themselves can be shared between nominated individuals, rather than just shared freely. So you do have a level of control.
Yes.
Who can see these files in folders, and that is, ultimately, that is the answer. Having said that, those facilities aren't necessarily available to everyone. If some of the examples that you gave earlier, So we just need to be careful when we're sharing things, especially if we do that by email. Depending on the version or on the type of email system that you have, you may be able to encrypt emails directly. So that is something that you can possibly do, especially if you're working amongst teams. So if everyone's using the same system, then those things become that bit easier. Now, there is something else that we can use. There is a free bit of software. Can I just take control?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll just take control and I'll show my screen. Try and get the right one. Okay. So here, just imagine that I wanted to share that file. This is a Word document, nothing on it, but it could have client details or anything. I might be reluctant to send that by email normally, but bear in mind we're in very strange times. I've got no option but to get that document to another party. But I want to do that as securely as possible. If I haven't got OneDrive or Google Drive, if I can't encrypt emails directly, then what I can do, I can download a program which is free, or at least free on a trial basis, called 7-Zip. So lots of people might be familiar with WinZip from years gone by. So this is very similar. And as you can see from the screen, if I was to right click on the document, or it could be a folder of documents, choose 7-Zip from the menu, add to archive, this will create a zipped file or a zipped folder of all of the documents that I've chosen. And then I can put an encryption password in and select the level of encryption. That encryption there, AES256, that's, I wouldn't say it's bulletproof, but it would take a long time to crack any passwords. I could then send that zipped folder to the other party and pass on the password to them, but I would tend to do that perhaps over the phone or definitely in a separate email if I can't ring them. So in that respect, that data can be sent to another individual and it's encrypted. The email is not encrypted, but the contents of the email are encrypted. So any sensitive information could be protected. And as long as we use a decent password and send that password in a different communication, then that is a decent way to make sure that sensitive information can be shared quite safely. So at some of the organisations I work with, we've actually sent or we've got agreements with various councils, for example, to use this as a method of getting various bits of data to them. So that's something that we can use. So that's a program called 7-Zip. And as I say, it's free, or at least a limited version of it's free. I'm just using the free version here, and I had access to the encryption side of things.
Excellent, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I have no other questions popping through at the moment. One thing that did occur to me though was maybe is it just worth showing people how to sort of password protect emails or documents within Word? Is that possible, or is that just something that they'd be better off kind of looking for a YouTube tutorial on if they're not sure how to do it?
That might be best because I'm on the spot and I'd have to work out where that particular menu option is.
No problem. That's absolutely fine. I'm just sorry for throwing throwing you a curveball, but no, that's really useful. So at the moment, yes, sorry.
Yeah, what we tend not to do, if we can help it, we tend not to password protect individual documents. Right. Here, in effect, we've created a copy of that document. It's in a zip folder. The problem with password protecting files is if we lose that password, if that document gets corrupted, then we may not be able to access it.
Okay.
So password protecting documents, I'm not that keen on. I'd rather have that source document somewhere safe anywhere. And if we were sharing it, I'd actually probably do it the way that you can see on screen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm just double checking, but I still can't see any further questions coming through. So in that case, I think I'm just going to try and take back control of the screen. And 1 second, I'm just going to turn my webcam off.
Sarah, I can see a question here from somebody.
Can you? Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry. To read it out?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Somebody said, I may have missed this because I joined the webinar a bit late due to IT issues, so that's ironic.
All right. Okay.
But do you have an example privacy policy for a website?
Right. Sorry. Yes, I can see that now from Emily. That's just come through. So I'm not quite sure what she means in terms of a privacy policy. The privacy policy for a website. Do you have your privacy policy on your website? You do, don't you, Rachel?
Yeah, if that's what you mean, Emily. Yeah, on our website we have all our policies generally, because I get so many requests for safeguarding policies, health and safety. So we just have them all as a PDF document on our website. You're more than happy to have a look at that. Like I say, it's, you know, I'm not saying it's the world's best policy, but it'll give you a start for 10 really in what you should include in there. So I hope that's what you mean.
Yes, that she's coming through and saying yes, that's what she meant. That's great. That's excellent. Okay. Sorry about that. I was just trying to finally change the presenter back to me and show my screen so that we can just say thank you to everybody, basically. So yeah, thank you very much for joining in today, and particular thanks to Mike and Rachel for the time and for their expertise, which they've given so kindly. On this slide, there's just a link to a SurveyMonkey link. If you could please fill out the brief survey to feedback on this webinar, we'd really appreciate it. Also, the recording, as I've said, will be uploaded onto our website shortly. Please feel free to contact the GCF team at any point for further information or support using the contact information on this slide. And don't forget to follow the GCF project on Twitter, and do tag us into any social media posts that you would like us to share, as we're always happy to do that to advocate and promote for the sector. And that's it, I think. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.